Alright everyone, welcome back. So today begins the 2024 edition of the Prospect Pool Overviews. I gotta say, this is my favorite series to do on the channel. This and the series preview, or the season previews, they are my favorite series to do because you get to cover all 32 teams, you get to talk about all the prospects and the future of the NHL, and it's all in all just really fun to do. So we're starting off with the Minnesota Wild this year. I think last year was the Oilers, but I thought I'd do it a different order this time. We're just doing it in the random order that I picked it. So Minnesota today. Now, Minnesota, when we did this last year, and I'll put this in the card up here if you guys want to go watch last year's, they had a couple guys that are not going to be on this list. Obviously, Brock Faber and Marco Rossi have both graduated from the prospects and are now at the NHL level, and they were their two best prospects, arguably. So it does make the pool worse. However, they still have a lot of really solid prospects that will make NHL impacts 100%. So we'll start off here with a guy that we covered in last year's prospect pool overview, and that's Danila Yurov. Yurov is a right-wing center from Zhelovich, Russia. I definitely said that wrong. He is 6'1", 172 pounds. He won silver at the U18 World Juniors in 2021. Obviously, he has not been able to participate in any since the Russia-Ukraine thing has gone on. The IIHF has removed them from international competition. But regardless, Yurov, I would argue, behind Wallstedt and maybe Buehm, he is probably their third or second best prospect in the system right now. He played a full season in the Continental Hockey League in Russia, which is arguably the second best hockey league in the world. He had 62 games played, 21 goals, 28 assists for 49 points as a young kid. He's not like super young like a lot of the other guys. Like, he's a little bit older than Michkov, but still, he had a really good season in the KHL as a youngster, and I think that shows that when he converts to the NHL level, he is 100% going to be a stud, for sure. Now, he was drafted 24th overall by the Wild in 2022, but he's not signed yet. That's the interesting thing. He has not been signed to a contract just yet. And the thing that I've realized with a lot of the Russians and a lot of their contracts is that they tend to sign later in their careers, and they tend to play a couple of years in Russia before they come over, like Marat Kuznatinov was one of those examples. He actually just came over this past year for Minnesota. There's a few other guys that do take a little bit to get there, like Kirill Kaprizov as well, too. So Yurov might be a couple years down the road still, maybe one or two more seasons. Unless if something changes this summer, he is not expected to come over this year. He might come over for like a development camp or, like rookie camp or something like that, but he is not yet signed to an entry-level contract by the Minnesota Wild, so something to keep in mind there. But regardless, he is still really exciting. He led the team in scoring on the team that he played for this year, and he drives play really well. He's a guy who can really move the puck. He's a good skater. He's great offensive mind. And obviously, too, he's a guy that can drive a lot of plays. And you want guys like that on your team. And I think Yurov could be a future solid top six forward for this Minnesota Wild roster. And I think that, honestly, you look at the guys they already have that are young, this team is a very exciting future, and Yurov could play into that if he does come over. Now, a guy that has come over and has played some games is Liam Öhgren, drafted in the same year as Yurov, with, I believe, the pick from the Kings in the Fiala deal. He's a left wing from Stockholm, Sweden, 6'1", 187 pounds. He won the U18 World Junior Gold in 2022. Again, as I said, he was drafted 19th overall in this past year's draft, or in 2022, not this past year. He split games with the Minnesota and Iowa Wild, so he played in the AHL and the NHL a little bit. So he did get some time up there, which is some great experience for him for sure. But he did spend the majority of his season in Farstad BK, which is in Sweden, in the SHL. He played 26 games, had 12 goals, 7 assists for 19 points. The way I envision Öhgren is a really good offensive mind, and he played with the pros. That's the biggest advantage. The SHL, not as like professional as the KHL or the NHL in that level, but it's still one of the leagues in Sweden where you get a lot of adults, and you're playing against a lot of pros over there in Sweden. So Öhgren has that experience over a couple of these guys on this list. He has a combination of shot pass, which if you don't know what that means, he can pass and shoot at the same time. Not at the same time, but can do both. He's not one of those players who specifically shoots. He does move the puck around a little bit, so he's a great playmaker, but he can score as well. So he's a very useful guy to have on your roster. I would imagine, though, unless if he does a really good training camp, he won't make the NHL roster right away. I would imagine he'll spend some time with Iowa and try and develop a little bit more down there. But he does have that pro experience, so it wouldn't surprise me if next season he jumps right to the NHL. It's not a surprise if that happens to me whatsoever. But Ogren, I'm really looking forward to him. And again, it shows that Yurov and Ogren, like, that's your really solid 2022 draft class right there. That's the guys you got in the first round. So they look very exciting. Now, another guy that I got here, and this is someone we didn't talk about last year. Last year, I think we put Rossi in his place, but since Rossi's graduated, I need a new forward to talk about. So I thought about talking about Kuznetsov. I thought about talking about Charlie Stramel. I'm going to go with Riley Heidt. I'm really high on Heidt, and I think that he could be a really high potential player, even though he was drafted in the second round. So he's a center/left wing from Saskatoon, Canada. He's 5'11", 183 pounds. He won the Hlinka Gretzky Gold in 22-23. So again, he has some medal experience. International play definitely helps. He was drafted 64th overall in the 2023 draft. Now I understand that Charlie Stramel was drafted in the first round of that draft, and he's probably ranked higher than Heidt on some of the prospect rankings you look at. But I don't want to go with just first-round picks. Like, a lot of these guys that are on this list were guys that were selected in the first round. I don't want to do that. I want to go after some guys that people may not know about. Will I touch base on Stramel at the end of this video? Yes. But I want to go in depth with these 5 guys that might not be all from the first round, but I think that's something that I think would be a good idea to enlighten the vision of some Wild fans who may not know who Heidt is necessarily. You might know of him, but you might not know what his skill set is and what he's capable of. Now, Heidt had a really good year with Prince George, a team that was okay. It wasn't that great. He played with Tariq Parasak, who was drafted this past year by the Capitals. He had 66 games played, 37 goals, 80 assists, 117 points. He's a great skater and has awesome instincts, too. That's someone you definitely would like to have on your team. He's a guy that can move the puck very well. He's a good shooter. He does need to work on his speed a little bit, which is something that if he does want to make it to the NHL level, he is going to need to improve on that. But I think that he can. I think that's definitely something that can be improved upon in the future. And I think that a season in Iowa would really help him out. Now, I'm not sure if he's fully going to Iowa just yet. He might stick another year in Prince George. But he is signed to an ELC, so he can't necessarily back out of coming to the Wild eventually. I would imagine, though, he will be over in the Wild's minor league systems or maybe in the NHL sometime soon. We'll see what comes there from Heidt, but a new guy that we haven't talked about yet in the prospect pool reviews. Next up is another guy that was drafted this past year at Zeev Buium. I could not skip Buium over this list. He's new with Faber graduating. He is probably the best defensive prospect now on this team. He's a defenseman from Laguna Niguel, USA, which is in California. He is 6 foot, 185 pounds. I personally think that Buium is one of, if not the best defenseman in this draft, behind Levshunov. I think he holds both great offensive and defensive capabilities that makes him a really solid two-way defenseman. And he won a national championship this past year, too, with Denver. So he has that on his resume as well as a guy that won it with his brother, Shai Buium, who's a Red Wings prospect. Maybe we'll talk about him next or in the next prospect pool review. But regardless, he was drafted 12th overall. The Wild really liked him because why? They traded up for him. They traded up for him, swapped with the Flyers pick to get Buium. And I think that that's a great selection at 12th overall. It's honestly a steal, to be honest. He had 42 games played, 11 goals, 39 assists for 50 points with Denver this past year. Again, he's very creative defensively, and he has a great two-way sense. So he's a guy that I really enjoyed this past year, watching him play for Denver internationally. And he also blossomed in the Olympics, too. He had 7 points in 5 games played. That was where I really started noticing him, was in the World Juniors. I saw this kid named Zeev Buium. I'm like, that's an interesting name. And I kind of followed him through the rest of that now. And he's a guy that I'm really interested in and hoping that he can do a lot of good in the coming seasons for the Minnesota Wild. I'm not 100% sure if he'll come over right away. I believe he is going to spend another year in Denver, but things can change. Things have changed before, so I'm not ruling it out that he does go to potentially Minnesota next season, but he might spend another year in school. We shall see. Next up, then, is Carson Lambos. We talked about Lambos in the last prospect pool review a year ago. He's not necessarily the highest ranked defenseman on this list. Damian Hunt was another guy that I saw that was ranked higher. But I figured since Lambos, we talked about him last year, I figured we'd give an update on him this year. The difference between Lambos from this year, from last year and this year, is that he actually played in the pros this past year. He went to the Iowa Wild and played a full season there. He's a defenseman from Winnipeg, Manitoba. He's 6'1", 196 pounds. He won the U20 World Junior Gold in 21-22. So again, some good Olympic experience there. He was drafted in the second round in 2021, 66th overall, and 69 games played this past year with the Iowa Wild, not the Minnesota Wild. He had 4 goals, 10 assists for 14 points. So I think Lambos, listen, the offense wasn't really there, but I think for a guy that is making an adjustment from the WHL to the the AHL, it's sometimes a little bit difficult for guys to get a lot of points. And he's also a defenseman too, but he's also could get some potential to play in the pro level a little bit this season. I'm not sure if he will get a lot of playing time with the Wild, but if he does have a good camp, I mean, the defense isn't as great as it's been in previous years. We'll see what happens there. And I think that you make a defense of William, Faber, Brodin probably, and as well as that too, Lambos. That's a really solid top 4. That's a terrific top 4. And Spurgeon too. Spurgeon's obviously in that as well. But yeah, I think that they have a lot of really solid, high-level defensive prospects. Now, heading into your goalie prospect, who is arguably, and actually is, your best prospect in your system, it's Jesper Wallstedt. He is the future goalie of the NHL, and I think that he is going to be a stud. He is a goalie from Vistara, Sweden. He's 6'3", 214 pounds. He won World Juniors in 18-19, so it's a while ago, but he did win it. He was drafted 20th overall in 2021. That was looked at the time as an amazing steal, especially since Kosa went before him. They got Wallstedt at 20th. That was terrific. He played 3 games this past year with the Minnesota Wild. I feel like the last couple of years he's played up a little bit, but this past year he really did get a chance. He played okay in some games. He had a below 900 save percentage in those 3 games played, but obviously it's 3 games played. It's not like it's a huge deal. But with Iowa, he had a really good year. He had 45 games played, 22, 19, and 4, a 2.70 and a .910. So he is ready for the NHL for sure, and I think that he could be into the backup role as soon as next season. There is a chance that Philip Gustafsson will be traded away. That is a massive possibility. But then again, what I do think too is that it's Fleury's last year in the NHL. If they want to put Wallstedt into the minors for another season, that wouldn't hurt. Because once Fleury retires, Wallstedt, I feel, would be more than ready to come up to the NHL level and play a legitimate starter or backup role. I think he would be ready for that. But we'll see what the Minnesota Wild want to do. They could trade Gustafsson. They could make another move to try and get Wallstedt up there next season. But obviously, we'll see what happens there with Wallstedt and the Wild. But regardless, he has a high ceiling and a lot of potential. So other prospects that are in the system as well that are worth talking about that I kind of touched base on a little bit earlier in this video. Marat Kuznetsov is a guy that played a little bit this past year. He played in the KHL a lot. He got his contract terminated midway through this season. I think he has a lot of potential to be a really good forward for the Wild. People don't really talk about him. He's one of the more underrated prospects in the league. Charlie Stramel, he's a great center. He played in Wisconsin this past year. I think that he has a shot at making the NHL this coming season, maybe, but probably will end up in Iowa. Damian Hunt, a solid defenseman, as we talked about. And then Rasmus Kupalainen and Caden Bankier are also guys that are on that list, too, for other prospects that are in the pool. So, yeah, that is your prospect pool overview for the Minnesota Wild. If you enjoy, make sure to subscribe down below. I greatly appreciate it. Next video, I think, is Utah. So it's a weird order we're doing, but I did this last year where I went in a completely different order than others. I think it'd be cool to go this way. So we'll start with Minnesota. We're moving into Utah next episode, which is a good pool. And yeah, regardless, thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.